Walking 32,000 steps a day comes with a hidden cost that no one ever warns you about. That hidden cost is actually a series of different taxes that come at you fast and furious as you cross into that fabled 32,000 step territory. Some of these are physical, some of these are emotional, mental, and yes, some of them are even social. So let's break each of these hidden costs down in this video. Let's talk about the first cost, and that's actually physical. The physical costs of walking 32,000 steps a day. And no, it's not that your feet fall off or you develop plantar fasciitis at some point. Hell no, none of that shit. What actually happens is that you begin to hate sitting altogether. You cannot go even a few minutes seated down. And in fact, you start avoiding situations where you have to be sitting for long stretches of time. This has happened to me shortly after I started averaging over 30,000 steps a day. It didn't happen to me when I was hitting comfortably 10,000 steps a day or even 20,000 steps a day, because I would even sit down to eat most of my meals, sit down to watch TV, go to different establishments to watch sports games, movies, what have you, sitting down for hours at a stretch. No, I could not stand the thought of going even 30 minutes on my butt as soon as I started averaging over 30,000 steps a day. And at first these were a couple of minor occurrences. For example, not opting to sit down while eating. That was just like a minor hindrance. I was at home in my place with my two dogs, so I figured, why even sit down? I can just crank out an extra 2,000, 3,000 steps even. And I could stack that up with another good activity. Another healthy activity like learning a language or immersive language learning and watching one of my favorite Portuguese or Spanish shows while I'm walking around and finishing up my high protein meal. Eventually, it led me to start avoiding situations where I would be seated for hours at a time. For example, going to the movies. I used to be a big fan of the cinema, of going to the movies to watch some of those, big blockbusters of the year. Like all of those Mission Impossible movies, all of those Fast and the Furious movies back when they were still good and not going off into space and doing stupid shit. Even some of the Mortal Kombat movies, some of the recent Marvel movies back when they were once again still pretty good. I immediately realized that every time I went to the movies, this would just be another painstaking ordeal where I'd have to be stationary for over 2 hours. 3 hours at times for some of these so-called sagas. So as a result, I stopped going to the movies. I figured I'm just gonna catch these movies when they're on streaming. And pretty soon I started avoiding movies altogether. I stopped going to the cinema. I stopped going to movie theaters. I stopped going to restaurants. I knew that I would have to sit down, wait for my meal to be served to me, eat it, and then wait for the bill to come to me. And all that process would easily take another hour. I used to be a big fan of the buffet restaurants, especially Brazilian barbecue or churrasco, depending on if you're Spanish or Portuguese speaker. I avoided going to these buffet restaurants altogether. I haven't gone to a buffet restaurant in over a year now. I haven't gone to the movies even once this year, right? I missed out on a Michael Jackson biopic. I missed out on a new Mortal Kombat movie. I know there are some superhero movies that already came out this year. I missed out on all of those on purpose because I knew that I would be sitting for hours at a time. And after my goal has become to surpass 32,000 steps a day, that's just a risk I cannot take, sitting for so many hours. And now I have a session, an almost whole day session with the other managers at my workplace on Thursday. And I'm absolutely dreading the fact that I have to spend several hours on my butt in an office locked with these octogenarians or however old these guys are. And that's going to take away some serious steps. So I've already proactively started to strategize as to how I'm going to be hitting my 32,000 steps this Thursday. And it came to me in a bold, flashing light, a big ass epiphany. What came to me was that instead of coming home super late that day and trying to crank out as many steps, hit my 32,000 steps before I go to bed that day, I might as well get the majority of my steps, maybe even 20,000 steps before I even go into the office that morning. I have a doctor's appointment, and instead of driving to that doctor's appointment, in fact, in the same general direction right here, I'm just gonna walk all the way over there. It's gonna be like a 55 minute walk that morning. That's an easy 5,000 steps I can knock out. And then I could even walk back another 5,000 steps. That's just 10,000 steps alone. And that morning, more than likely, I'm going to do Portuguese. I'm going to consume my first meal of the day. So 10,000 plus 10,000, that's an easy, crisp 20,000 steps before I have to subject myself to all of those hours of sitting. And no, I will not be sitting for 8 hours that day. I'm probably going to be getting up from my seat and purposely going to the bathroom or frequenting other spots in that office that day. You will not catch me on my ass for 8 hours that day. So that's a physical cost of walking over 32,000 steps a day. You will absolutely loathe the mere act of sitting down for even a small stretch of time, and you're going to actively avoid situations and venues where you have to be seated for most of the time. So that's a physical cost. Now let's talk about the social cost of walking 32,000 steps a day. The first social cost is that you're going to start to lose a lot of friends and family members. And even in certain instances, depending on what culture you're a part of, even your parents are going to leave your side. Why does this happen? Well, it happened to me. When I became an avid daily walker, when I committed myself, even past 20,000 steps back in 2024, I started adopting certain habits as a consequence of becoming a person who averaged over 20,000 steps. I used to go to bed super early. I used to get up super early. I started to go on more like hikes, long walks, more events out in nature. I avoided, a lot of like gatherings, like social gatherings, family gatherings, what have you. And as a result, I realized that, and you're going to realize that too, most relationships are based on shared mediocrity. What really unites people is just common interests, and those common interests are usually around gathering together to eat, highly processed food, or gathering together to commiserate over their problems. And these gatherings usually take place at, guess what, restaurants, at their homes. So if you're opting to avoid restaurants, to avoid going to people's homes, to avoid hanging out with people, guess what's going to happen? Eventually, that shared mediocrity is going to wear off, right? That need to constantly kind of hang out and bond together is going to die. And as a result, you're going to start losing friends left and right. To this day, I probably lost more friends in the past 2 years than I lost maybe in my teenage years and my college years when I was still, actively trying to be social. And in terms of family members and parents, they're never going to understand your health goals. They're never going to understand your goals around fitness, least of all around being an avid, high volume daily walker. They're going to think you're a psychopath like everyone else. They're going to lambaste you. They're going to attack you. They're going to say that you should be like everybody else, right? Follow the herd. Be an NPC, just like everyone else, spending a majority of their day being sedentary, not being active, avoiding resistance training. Yeah, that's also a big thing too, depending on what culture you're a part of. So you're going to start losing friends and family members left and right because more than likely they're not going to share those same health and fitness goals, and definitely not share your love of daily walking. So that is going to be the social tax that you have to deal with once you start walking over 32,000 steps a day. So now, let's talk about the third hidden cost of walking over 32,000 steps a day. And that has everything to do with avoiding one of the vices that I'm going to actually dive deeper in later this week, and that is gluttony. Once you start walking over 32,000 steps a day, even 30,000 steps, even 20,000 steps, I realized this back in 2024, you're going to become so conscious about everything you're consuming on a daily basis that you will eventually start swearing off all types of highly processed food. And as I mentioned in the first hidden cost of this video, you're going to start avoiding restaurants. You're going to start avoiding buffets. You're going to avoid family gatherings, because those gatherings are really just occasions for people to come together and just eat high volumes of very unhealthy food. So when you become so conscious and you start tracking your calories, you start tracking your macros, you start planning your meals in advance inside of MyFitnessPal, right? You already have your meals, your calories, your macros scheduled for that week. Maybe you're in a calorie deficit and you can only afford so many calories in a day in a given week. Suddenly, you know exactly what you need to consume on a daily basis. So now, you watch a commercial on TV for the latest like fast food burger or the latest restaurant opening, and you opt to just ignore that commercial or just switch off your TV. You stop going into restaurants. You start refusing invites to hang out with friends and family members, because those get-togethers are going to take place at restaurants where you know there are going to be absolutely zero healthy options. And even the so-called healthy options are going to be chock full. For example, salads are going to be chock full of fatty dressing anyway. And you don't know exactly what they're putting in meals to make them even more addictive, highly palatable. So as a result of walking so many steps every single day, you become extra conscious about every little thing you eat. And then you start hearing the comments, right? Not even, behind your back. People are going to be very upfront with you. They're going to tell you to stop being on a diet, that what you're doing is actually unhealthy, right? That you need to live a little, you need to have balance. When it comes to tracking your calories, macros, and overall eating clean, single ingredient foods, there's no such thing as balance, right? I don't believe in abiding by an 80-20 or even a 90-10 diet where 80% or 90% would be the amount of clean foods and everything else, 10%, 20% would be junk food. I basically adopt an all or nothing strategy, because even 10% of junk food is enough to poison your taste buds and poison, most importantly, your mind into thinking that you need to start getting into the habit of consuming those unhealthy foods on a regular basis. You might not necessarily be consuming them on a daily basis, right? Maybe it's a weekend binge session, but that's enough to throw you off your calorie and your macro goals. And ultimately, when you're walking regularly at 20,000, 25,000, and like me, 32,000 steps a day, you're going to be very conscious of your primary energy source, which should be coming from single ingredient whole foods. If you're consuming crap, you're gonna look like crap, and as a result, your results, especially when it comes to daily walking, are going to be highly crappy. So that is a physical as well as a mental cost of walking 32,000 steps a day. So now let's talk about another social tax that's going to be imposed on you automatically as a result of walking 32,000 steps a day. You're going to start to value your fitness, your daily step goal, which you should be progressively overloading over time, far more, and you're going to actually prioritize daily walking, your health and fitness, and your overall mental peace over pursuing romantic relationships. And this is not going to happen, obviously, for those of you folks who are still in your late teens, early 20s, maybe even in your mid 20s, right? Your hormones are still like at their all-time high. You're still being, you're living in la la land, consuming all of this, rom-com crap, thinking that they're soulmates and all of this other bullshit. But very apparently, and very actually brutally, in fact, once you enter into your mid, and in my case, late 30s, you're going to realize that all those relationships are going to do to you are going to cost you time, energy, attention, and in some cases, money too. A lot of money. Romantic relationships are going to become a hindrance more than anything else. Suddenly, when you're walking 32,000 steps a day, all you need is just a pair of AirPods, a trusty pair of walking shoes, and just the open road ahead, right? No one nagging you, no one belittling you, no one trying to manipulate you using drama or mind games, none of that crap, right? Walking and overall maintaining your fitness, cardiovascular fitness, your musculoskeletal fitness, that's why you need to go into the gym 3 times a week. That becomes far more worthwhile and wholesome than hanging on to a romantic relationship, which more than likely is going to prove to be toxic over the long run. Short term, everything has a honeymoon period, especially those relationships. You get into them really fast, you fall for that other person, you feel like you're at the top of the world, but inevitably it comes crashing down. Because, as I mentioned, most relationships are built based on shared mediocrity. And that goes for romantic relationships as well. You have some shared commonalities in the beginning that unite you, but eventually those differences come at you fast and furious, and those differences and other people as well are going to be enough to tear that relationship apart. And by the end of it, you're going to have barely any memory of all the good times, so-called, that you had with that person. You're going to just remember all the time, the energy, and most importantly, the peace that you wasted in that relationship. So, speaking from personal experience, but it's taken a while for me to also kind of remember the good times, and I try to hold on to the good times that I had from the lone romantic relationship that I've so far experienced in my life. I've had tons of flings, of course, don't get me wrong, but romantic relationship and all, lovey-dovey shit, only experienced that once, and never again. Walking is all I need. Walking, eating clean, single ingredient whole foods, preparing all my meals at home, none of that goofy shit, and of course, getting in the gym and lifting like a man, progressively overloading over time. That's all I need. A 3-part equation to maintaining my peace and ultimately attaining freedom. Very, very soon. That's a path that I'm on. So that's going to be the 4th hidden cost of walking 32,000 steps. Basically, the choice that you make to neglect romantic relationships in favor of daily walking, high volume daily walking. Now, let's talk about the last hidden cost of walking 32,000 steps a day. You're going to realize, and this is only going to come, in fact, this is one of the costs that only comes with walking 32,000 steps, or even more. You're going to realize that less is more, and that you can achieve far more peace, inner clarity, and freedom by subtraction, by subtracting out all of the things that are taking away from your mental health, physical health, and fitness. Minimalism is going to become your mantra. Very soon, you're going to start not only subtracting all of the negative people, negative relationships, negative jobs, but also all of the material possessions that you have as well. I've moved probably already 4 or 5 times in the last 4 or 5 years. And I think I have less things now that I had at the start of all of these 4 or 5 moves in the past few years, right? I was in Florida, I had a ton of junk, like all of this furniture, all of these electronics, all of these clothes. I dumped all of that shit as I became even more locked in and went all in on my health and fitness. 2024 was like a groundbreaking year for me, right? I realized that this is what brought me true happiness in life. Just walking on the open road, or even just walking in circles around my rental home in Palm Bay, or a rental home in here in Northern Virginia. Even on the rare occasions, a couple of times I went to see my parents, I was constantly walking around from floor to floor within their townhouse, going into the gym, realizing that I felt at peace, and I felt a certain type of pride and accomplishment every time I started on a new weight or I achieved a new PR in the gym. And then even when I started cooking all my meals for the very first time, I realized that I had 100% control over exactly what was going into my body. I was no longer a prisoner to my cravings, prisoner to my gluttony, something that I've struggled with and suffered from for years. Once I subtracted all of that shit, all that negativity from my life, I realized that minimalism is something that I had been essentially striving for all this time. The less you own, the more you own of your own life, the more of your destiny that you own. And the more things you own, unfortunately, those things end up owning you. So you don't necessarily have to become a full-fledged minimalist to realize and to understand everything that I'm talking to you right now with this last hidden cost. But this realization is going to come at you automatically. I didn't strive to become a minimalist when I first started walking over 20,000 steps in 2024. When I was in Brazil, when I was in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, all the times I flew back to Florida and then drove between Florida and the Mid-Atlantic, or Nova, where I'm currently at. Minimalism was never a goal that I wanted to attain. It just naturally came about, organically, if you will. Less is more. That is going to be a big takeaway of that last social cost. And in my estimation, it's actually not a tax. It's actually a blessing in disguise, to realize that you don't really need a lot to be happy. And that health and fitness, above all, should be everyone's number one priority. We're out here keeping up with the Joneses, running after material possessions, devoting ourselves to trying to make more money, hustling for what? Right? What the hell is the point of that? This is the point of life. This walk, this conversation that I'm having with you guys, this walk and talk, that total body workout session that I had this morning, the dinner that's waiting for me when I get back to my place right after I finish recording this video. That is what life is all about.